More than just a superficial surface idea of what politics is about. I wanted to have an in-depth view. I think that's part of the problem right now. Why we seem to be this Kardashian society. I just gave a speech in University of North Carolina for economics students, going on a university campus and trying to find somebody who knows who Adam Smith is, or John Locke, or naming a founding father. This debate about Alexander Hamilton on the $10 bill, the father of the Treasury, and probably one of the single most important people in getting the colonies together, united, to form our country and have that first constitutional convention. I think progressives have been very, very smart. I mean, they are very patient. They've undermined our educational system, and they're kind of pushing this brainwashing of changing our values and revising history. Because if people don't know what their constitutional rights are, then they won't be alarmed when they're being stripped away. What was it that Madison said, that it's more likely that these kind of changes are going to happen by the gradual erosion of your rights rather than sudden and violent usurpations. And I think that's probably more true today. But since this is going to be a fun session, we're going to focus more on cartoons than me blathering about, because you can hear that at all these other forums. Now, I'm an equal opportunity offender. Here's George W. Bush with his lens caps on. And this is a cartoon I drew when Joe Biden decided he was going to drop out of the race. You're not running, Saab. There used to have Hillary, Bernie, and the Donald. How about a full-body massage? One pitfall to being a political cartoonist is you've got one window to present your point of view. And so these issues often are pretty complex. So you have to find the ones that people are familiar with. And because the demise of newspapers, it's getting harder and harder to find issues that people are really familiar with. I start the day around 5 o'clock every day because I co-manage the editorial page at Investors Business Daily. So I have to know what's going on so that I could set up my editorial meetings. And I watch the news at every half hour to get a sense of what's on the American consciousness. But unfortunately, in a cartoon, if you make it too wordy, then it becomes a less effective tool. Think of political cartooning as the same as a Super Bowl ad. With the Super Bowl ad, they pay $4 million an ad because these things are very effective. But they're effective because they're very concise and they're funny. And you get 5 seconds to capture the viewer's attention, 5 seconds to deliver a sale on whatever it is that what product you're selling. With political cartoons, it's just ideas.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
How often do you create a cartoon?
Every 15 seconds or so in my mind.
Do you have to produce one every day?
I don't. I'm because I'm international syndicated. I have 450 papers, and I promise them 4 cartoons minimum a week.
Okay.
So I'll do 4 cartoons a week, but sometimes because the great thing about being at IBD is that and being syndicated is I get to call my own shots. I co-manage the editorial page, so if I have a 2 cartoon day inspiration, we'll have a cartoon on the regular page and one on the op-ed page. So usually you'll get probably six cartoons minimum. I do 5 for IBD, 1 for the Weekly Standard. Yeah, a week. Mm-hmm. And I read both. I read the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal. I read 4 papers a day. I always tell people that the joke is that somewhere in between the Wall Street Journal editorial page and the New York Times editorial page lies the truth. Actually, it lies in the editorial pages of Investors Business Daily. But, the sad part about my job is I'm a political wonk. I'm pretty boring. This is a cartoon on Hillary Clinton. Remember when she said if only we could train dogs to detect lies. And then here I have the media as the dog sitting in her lap, and the caption is "if only." To do one of the, my schedule's been crazy. I think I've done, this is my 6th speech, my 5th book signing, 4 television interviews, 3 radio interviews, 1 podcast in 11 days in 4 different states. So I'm actually drawing on the road. Unfortunately, in this political environment, it's very easy. But for every one of these cartoons, I'll come up with a dozen different ideas. I mean, dozen different ideas. I mean, I had ones where, Hillary was saying in the first panel, if only we could train dogs to detect lies, and then the next panel, she's treed, and there's 150 dogs climbing up the tree barking at her, So there's different variations. But you want to pick the device that's going to be, welcome to our crowd, by the way. You want to pick the device that's going to seize their attention right away. These are the cartoons that I submitted for my Pulitzer entry this year. This is Barack Obama saying we don't have a complete strategy on ISIS, and his advisors looking around at all the piled up dead bodies saying ISIS does. So the cartoon that's the effective vehicle is the one, that will shock, but not have that shock overwhelm the message of the cartoon. So let's talk a little bit about controversy and humor. An important element to doing political cartoons is not just thinking of the political cartooning, but thinking when not to run the cartoon. And I don't do controversial cartoons for the sake of controversy, like I don't do humorous cartoons for the sake of humor. I'm doing it for a purpose, and the purpose is to deliver a message to reach the American public, to activate them into this wonderful system of self-governance. But if you make the controversy of the cartoon overshadow the point that you're trying to make, you lose it as an effective tool to reach people. And I think that's true in any visual medium. If you make it so funny, like some of those ads you see that are hilarious, but then you think back, what was that ad about? I have no clue. It's got to be something that coexists within that element so that it becomes an effective tool. I think the modern trend of political cartooning has been to make simple jokes about current affairs. And I think humor without a substantive message, I think it diminishes the importance of the political cartoon, because that's why we're a category in the Pulitzer Prizes, because it's serious journalism if you do it right. Editorial cartoons aren't just a funny picture. It's a fine instrument of journalism. And as with any editorial, it has a point. But a good editorial cartoon shouldn't just be well-researched. I think it has to be carefully contemplated. So we were talking about this, a little bit about controversy. I always get the question about, would you draw a controversial cartoon like a cartoon of Muhammad? If I could use your name and your picture on my bio, I would be glad to do it. But the general answer is no. And the reason being, not because I'm afraid of offending a bunch of people. It's because I think the controversy surrounding that element of the cartoon would overshadow the point I'm trying to make. And there is a point to what I'm doing. Now, remember when Johnny Cochran died? Johnny Cochran, of course, was the lawyer who defended O.J. Simpson, and he essentially got a murderer off. Now, when he died, the first image that came to my mind was Johnny standing at the gates of heaven with St. Peter, and St. Peter was saying, "I'm sorry, Johnny, if the halo don't fit, we don't admit." It's a natural idea. But after a more careful examination of Johnny Cochran and who he was and what he did, I was at the LA Times at the time, and I found out a whole different persona, a guy who was very, very generous and had done many, many things for the community. And when it came down to the point where I felt it was unfair to characterize him off of one incident in his entire career. When the Space Shuttle Challenger exploded, the big controversy, the big issue around that accident was whether or not the NASA cutbacks had been so severe that it cut into the safety requirements of the shuttle program. And so the first image that came to my mind was these little pieces of the shuttle flying through the sky with a bubble coming out of one of the tiniest pieces saying, man, these NASA cutbacks are killing us. Now again, it makes a very formidable, powerful point. But then 7 American heroes died in the process. So you have to weigh those, you have to balance those, because when it comes to...
Release that. You didn't draw that.
I didn't draw that one either. Yeah. We're going to get into the obnoxious ones that I draw in a second. But, like I said, it's not humorous for the sake of humor. It's not controversial for the sake of controversy. I don't think it's conservative or liberal. It's whether you agree with it philosophically or not. I think a good editorial cartoon engages the reader in debate. And that's what I want to do. I want to open up the process to inform and challenge the reader to get them into the democratic process. Because when you take the real number of people that are voting in this electorate for the president of the most powerful country in the world, you take all the eligible electorate, I think the number is like 29%, that's electing the president of the most powerful nation in the world. This is a government that's built for our benefit because you have great access. And I know a lot of people are frustrated with what's going on right now. But I think when you get a chance and you get to talk to the politicians out there, it will surprise you how little it takes to get them engaged on your behalf. Because so many people are so cynical about the process, they just don't contact them. It's much more accessible than you think. This is on President Obama erasing the borders and the judges putting the borders back. So the visual element that can be seen automatically and identified and then understood. And if you make it funny on top of that, I think it becomes a more effective tool. When President Obama was talking about Al Qaeda being on the run, this is what he meant. They're running after him. In the Declaration of Independence, Thomas Jefferson wrote, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that we are endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But while these rights are indeed endowed by a Creator and guaranteed by our Constitution, it is the government that upholds these liberties, and it is men who constitute the government. And there are those within our government who believe that the Constitution is merely a starting point for negotiation." Journalism, I think editorial cartoons are a check on the erosion of our liberties and part of the first line of defense to the advance of the unrestrained power of government. And we've seen in the last talk about how overwhelming government can be. I mean, he barely touched upon the product about the controversy surrounding Social Security. But when you think about it, we have $128 trillion in unfunded liabilities and entitlements. And the demographic is growing backwards. We have a smaller pool of people that are paying in to fund these mechanisms than people that are growing old and taking more of them. This is on Hillary Clinton. Your email problems are beginning to worry us. You've got jail. So a good editorial cartoon is going to seize your attention. I try to make the illustrations pretty interesting to look at, but to have a good point on top of it. And I always put little stuff in the backgrounds. Hopefully we'll get to the Clinton era, but this is on the welfare state, what the true idea of modern slavery is today, illustrated. The Clinton administration was a big bonus in my career. I won my first Pulitzer in '97 from the Clintons. And I got a nice congratulatory note from the president and her husband. And so I gathered all my Clinton cartoons together, my favorite ones, and I put a little note on top of it that says, "Thanks, I couldn't have done it without you." And I sent it to the White House, which I thought was funny until I got audited 4 months later. But yeah, seriously. Now, who knows why I got audited, but I have a great accountant, so I survived it. Einstein once said, "Two things are infinite, the universe and human stupidity," and I'm not sure about the universe. Einstein was right. It's this axiom which I think makes political cartooning important. The people who ultimately govern are going to make mistakes. Most of them are human after all. But history has demonstrated that power can turn leaders into monsters. Power corrupts. And editorial cartoonists will gladly point out the shortcomings of the powerful in an effort to keep them human. There's a reason our founding fathers included a right to a free press in the First Amendment of our Constitution. Information is a necessary component to guide you in a political system based on self-governance and individual liberty. When you think about it, information is power. Now imagine if you knew about this great little company back in December 12th, 1980, and you purchased 100 shares at its initial public offering at $20 a share, $22 a share. Those shares would be worth over $500,000 today. That company is called Apple, and they're helping us out in the war against terrorism today. Thomas Jefferson wrote, "Our liberty depends on the freedom of the press, and that cannot be limited without it being lost." The reason our founding fathers included the right to a free press in our Constitution was because they knew the communication of ideas and information, the right to be informed and to inform, the dissemination of ideas, and the expression of opinion are all necessary components in a political system based on self-governance and individual liberty. So I think that's why these visual elements are very, very important. I don't want to say the American public is lazy. The American public is lazy. But graphics, visual graphics, the dynamics of it delivers a message much quicker, and I think people like the visual medium. This is on our Governor Jerry Brown in California. Reservoirs, what California obviously needs are shorter showers and high-speed rail. And they're measuring the inside of his head, and they're saying this reservoir is nearly empty. I think images like this can capture your attention and bring to light the controversy surrounding these issues. If you were aware of the evil back then, would the world have prevented it? With ISIS making the mustache of Adolf Hitler. I want to make profound statements that challenge your humanity and make you question, with a basis in history, how these things reflect on today's modern society. When Caitlyn Jenner came out, this is the evolution of man. Barack Obama at the cleaners. I think I've got a good Iranian nuclear deal in hand, taken. And when you think about it, this election is so pivotal this year because of the massive changes that are occurring around the world. Well, think of this from the perspective of 9/11. 9/11 was basically, 19 terrorists funded by a few Saudi millionaires who killed 3,000 Americans. Today, with ISIS, you've got 35 to 50,000 fighters that are rotating through, that are learning to kill people and being processed and sent back to their host countries with this training. They make about $1.2 million a day in oil revenue and off of criminal activity. They have U.S. and Western passports. The exposure to danger is much more relevant today, I think. We're in a much more precarious situation today than we were back then. And now when you add the nuclear element with a nuclear Iran, think of it from this point of view. This is a region that's awash in oil money with very little regard to human life. And I know a lot of people have depended upon mutually assured destruction as a way to counter this danger. Mutually assured destruction only works when the other side doesn't want to die. And now you've got 13 African and Middle Eastern countries that are engaged in the pursuit of this nuclear formula. And so instead of 9 nuclear powers and trying to keep the wraps on fissionable material, you're going to have 21 or 22. So these kind of cartoons hopefully are going to, I have another one that I'll show you later on, will expose the danger and make you think about it. This is the Planned Parenthood fetal harvest chart. And sometimes the best way to challenge an idea is to illustrate the seriousness of the topic right off the bat. Pardon? Yeah, it did. Yes. Pardon? Of course. I may be the only political cartoonist that's protested himself. And the second Pulitzer was pretty mild. The first Pulitzer was the biggest protest ever in a Pulitzer ceremony, and it was on the gay lesbian issue on testing for HIV. And I had a debate with the president of GLAAD. And one thing too, let me emphasize, I think when you do political cartoons, you shouldn't do a cartoon that you can't substantiate or argue for. And so at the time, the debate was centered around whether or not HIV testing would erode some of our personal liberties if that information got out. Of course, that information's medical and it wouldn't get out, but it was more beneficial to the people that engaged in that kind of behavior, whether they're HIV infected people from sex or intravenous drug using. They had an obligation to tell their partners about it. And so she called me up and yelled at me, and I said, look, give me 30 seconds to explain to you why I think it's beneficial for your membership to know this, whether you're exposed to this virus or not. But she continued on to call me a bunch of names, and finally I said, look, one last chance. Let me just explain to you why it's important. And she just called me a bunch of names, racist, sexist, homophobe. And I said, look, I understand your frustration. I've been a lesbian all my life. And that became the genesis of the largest protest at a Pulitzer ceremony ever. And as I pulled up to the Columbia University Library, all these people dressed in all kinds of different fanfare, guys in pink tutus and mohawks and stuff, ran up to my car, and I got out to engage them in debate, and they handed me a flyer protesting myself. They had no idea what I looked like. And so I actually got a picket sign, and I picketed myself. So let's go through here. I think the media, this is on the refugee roulette, and this is ISIS as one of the chambers. And I did get a lot of blowback from this cartoon as well. But the question is, again, as we talked about earlier, when you have these kinds of dangers with people that you cannot identify and you don't know their backgrounds, why is it less compassionate to say we're going to put a safety zone in your area and keep you safe near your homeland so you can return at some point? Because there's a difference between it being immigrants and being refugees. This is on Greece and the lack of fiscal responsibility. This is when the State Department claims that the lack of jobs was behind the rise of ISIS, and he's saying, I couldn't get a job beheading people in the private sector. Look, words are powerful, but I think the visual aspect of political cartoons are what makes it so effective. In the case where the gal got killed in San Francisco, these are the accomplices to the murder. It was not only Sanchez who pulled the trigger, but it was the sanctuary city policy. And it was the Obama immigration policy on top of that are equally responsible for this 5-time felon, or when he was a 7-time felon, got into the country 5 different times. The Clinton Foundation. Again, mutually assured destruction only works when the other side doesn't want to die. Weekend at Bernie's. How dare you call us a do-nothing Congress? Why I oughta. People often ask me, how do I get inspiration for my ideas? I'm inherently evil. But these days with this administration and the lack of, the lawlessness of this administration, it's more like doing stenography than anything creative. I always say that I have the best gag writer in the world working for me in the Oval Office when he's not playing golf or on vacation. But political cartoons are a serious art form. They can make a serious impact in the political debate. Mr. President, you may not believe in radical Islam, but radical Islam believes in you. On the cartoonists that were killed in Paris, the pen is mightier than the sword. You may be able to extinguish the individual lights of the cartooning world, but you won't extinguish the light of liberty. It's the difference between what we have here and what we take for granted in this country. And I went down to Cuba with a PBS crew to try to get arrested on the streets of Havana. And I got to talk to the information minister, the guy who came out for the Elian Gonzalez episodes during that debate. And I asked him a bunch of questions about the Brothers in Arms flight that was shot down in international airspace, about the journalists that were arrested for promoting democracy, about the tugboat of refugees that they actually pulled out beyond eye view of Havana Harbor and hosed down all the people and drowned them. In Cuba, the Grandmother, which is a national newspaper, they have to go through a political committee and an editorial committee to get their things in print. The cartoonists can't even draw pictures of Fidel Castro or Che Guevara. And there's a reason for that. It's a difference between democracy and tyranny. So it was obvious that the Interior Minister wasn't going to answer any of my questions. So I said, let me just ask you one last question. I talked to your political cartoonists. They can't draw Che or Fidel. In America, we believe that a country that cannot make fun of its leaders is usually imprisoned by its leaders. So tell me, what's your favorite Fidel Castro joke? And his face just went white. And he sat there on television for probably a minute and a half, which is an eternity on television, with little beads of sweat gathering on his forehead. And he finally said, I don't know one, but I'll tell you one later. This is the difference between the democracy we have here that we take for granted and the tyranny that exists in other countries where they don't have the opportunity to voice their opinion. It's what makes the visual medium, I think, so effective. Should I tell the duck story, Laura? The duck story? There was this duck, and he went up to the manager of the store, and he said, got any grapes? And the manager looked at the duck, and he said, no, we don't have any grapes. The duck said, oh, and walked out. 10 minutes later, the duck comes waddling in, goes up to the manager and says, got any grapes? The manager looks at the duck and he says, no, we have no grapes. Duck goes, oh, and walks out. 10 minutes later, this duck comes walking in, goes up to the manager and says, got any grapes? The manager goes, what's wrong with you, duck? We have no grapes. I don't like grapes. I don't like ducks. Get out of my store. Duck goes, oh, walks out. 10 minutes later, the duck comes wandering in, goes up to the manager, says, got any grapes? The manager looks at the duck and he says, I don't have grapes. I will never have grapes. Don't ask me for grapes. Get out of my store. Duck goes, oh, walks out. 10 minutes later, the duck comes waddling in, goes up to the manager. Manager goes, hold it right there, duck. If you ask me for grapes one more time, I'm going to nail your little web feet to the floor. Ask me for anything else. Don't ask me for grapes. And the duck looks at him and he says, got any nails? He says, no. Got any grapes? See, I think this joke provides a good working analogy of how I view Washington bureaucracies at work. Because here in D.C., things are not always represented as they truly are. For example, a rational effort to save Medicare, a slower increase in Medicare, is called a draconian cut. A balanced budget amendment, which stipulates that Congress can only spend the amount of money they take in, is not called common sense. It's called extremism. Making illegal immigration illegal is not called following the law. It's called insensitivity. Judging someone not by the content of their character, but strictly by the color of their skin, is not called racism. It's called affirmative action. Aborting a human fetus in its third trimester is not called killing. It's called a choice. When governments have a surplus, it doesn't mean that we paid too much in taxes. It just means we spent too little in services. And a tax is no longer a tax. It's called an investment in America. I think Biden called it patriotism. There is no global war on terror. It's called an overseas contingency operation. The Fort Hood attack was called workplace violence. They called the Muslim Brotherhood a largely secular group which has eschewed violence. The Muslim Brotherhood, it's secular. It has the name Muslim in it. The Islamic State is neither Islamic or a state. They won't use the word radical Islam or Islamic extremists. And blowing up buildings is no longer called terrorism. It's called a man-caused disaster. Well, I don't know about you, but I believe in the old adage, if it walks like a duck and it talks like a duck, it's usually a duck. My job as a political cartoonist is to nail that duck to the floor, because someone needs to watch over the Institution for the Intellectually Challenged, the Obama administration, to protect the American people. Politicians often forget who they work for because of the pomp and circumstance that surrounds these career political celebrities. We're lulled into thinking it is we who work for them, when it is they who work for us. That's what makes this a grand republic. Our country is built around the idea of self-governance and independence, but 39% of Americans are on some kind of government program. 1 in 6 Americans are on direct government assistance. 50% of Americans do not pay taxes, or 47%. In the last election, I was talking about the turnout. You have less than 29% that voted for the president of the most powerful country in the world. You have to ask yourself, is this America you want? Is it the America that Ronald Reagan envisioned? Certainly not. It's amazing when you look back in history at a small group of colonists united to fight taxation without representation. It's clearly evident that we face the same challenge. Our nation's founded on the principles of limited government, individual liberty, self-responsibility, and a strong national defense. Barack Obama promised hope and change, but all he's really delivered is doubt and division. He wanted change, all right. He wanted a radical transformation of this country, and to a certain extent, they've succeeded. And he hoped nobody would notice. I think it's time to take our country back. So what I do as a political cartoonist is I use the visual medium. This is on U.S.-Japan trade. Aren't they supposed to face you when they bow? To try to provoke people to engage in the debate. That's what America's about, the modernization of the Catholic Church. We'd like to renegotiate the 10 Commandments down to 4.5. Our moral fabric. Images like this that capture attention, sell a story, and make you think about issues. That's what it comes down to. Political cartooning's about messaging, about being the catalyst for thought, to engage all of you guys in debate. Because the fact of the matter is, we got the greatest country in the world. What makes America extraordinary are its people. And so you have to be engaged on a grassroots level. I mean, this is why I like being at CPAC. You guys are the future. I mean, you are engaged. You are people involved in the process. And this process was built for you. So don't let the politicians take it from you. I'll take questions real quick if you have any. Any questions? Father, you can't say prayers during graduation ceremonies, but you print them on condoms. We'd be happy to distribute them. Yes?
When you publish your cartoons and what kind of cartoons get the most comments and responses? Do you know going in something is going to cause a lot of activity and response and comments?
You do. I mean, some issues are very volatile. And abortion, I think, is an issue that's very, very volatile. Sometimes the cartoon itself is volatile. Let me see if I can find one real quick. Here, this one. You two here to be married will step up and be counted. My society we try to impose its moral values on us is beyond me. It's perfectly natural for two people in love to want to be married. Your father should be proud of you. He is my father. It's not necessarily on a singular issue. It's on the question of what are the consequences of these things we are deciding today and the future, and what kind of other problems do they entail. Elliot Spitzer figured they should put the microphones where his brain was. But you know what? I don't really think about whether or not it's going to generate controversy. Controversial subjects are going to generate controversy. And one of my favorite immigration cartoons is I have got two Indians, and they're looking at the they're looking at the Mayflower in the harbor, and one of the Indians is saying, profiling is politically incorrect. Besides, they pose no real danger to us. Of course, everybody on the opposite side of the immigration debate weighed in on that. But that's what this is all about. I get death threats all the time. It's part of the job when people ought to be emotionally invested in their politics. You ought to be passionate about it. I mean, that's what it's all about. We all have a fundamental idea of what this country ought to be, and you ought to feel passionate about it. I remember once I was sitting in my office, this is when I was working for USA Today in the commercial appeal, and they evacuated the entire building. And of course, I'm working and I'm oblivious to the alarms and stuff, and so I'm the last person. The security had to come and escort me out. As I walked down the parking lot, I got a standing ovation. It's because somebody had called in a bomb threat. And so it was my fault that everybody got evacuated from the building. But that's part of the beauty of what we do here. This allowance to have your opinion. Yes?
I was just curious, would you say that you would be held to a different standard than, say, like a Danziger? He did once did a put a project in the New York Times with Condoleezza Rice as a mammy and all about WNZs.
You mean as a conservative political cartoonist versus a liberal? I think absolutely so. Yeah, it's just the nature of the business. We're outnumbered 9-1, so I have to be 9 times more obnoxious than the competition. And that's the unfortunate circumstance of the journalism profession, and why you ought to demand equality and objectivity from the media. Look, there are things that we can do. It doesn't seem like you're empowered in this day and age, but you really are. If you see, I'm a free market capitalist, and I'm going to have a book signing, so I want you all to go out and buy my books, obviously. But the power of capital is enormous. If you see something on television that you don't like, then complain about it. Or if there's a film out there that doesn't share your values, don't see it. I just saw Risen the other day. What a terrific movie. I don't know if you guys have seen that. It's a terrific movie that has really great values that it's imposing on society. Those things need to be supported. And I'm having a party at my house next Saturday, in a couple days. What is it, tomorrow? What's today? Thursday? I've been traveling so much I have no idea. On Saturday. And they've been trying to fund this movie about Ronald Reagan for the last 5 years. I can't think of a more iconic American story about our constitutional values than Ronald Reagan. Conservatives need to step up and start doing this. I mean, they're reshaping, our culture through education and through popular culture. I think Friends and Will and Grace probably had a bigger impact on the same-sex marriage debate than anything. These are things that we ought to be concerned about as far as remaining within the boundaries of what our constitutional foundation is and the type of country you want to see in the future. Yes. What do I think about Donald Trump? Well, I have my little pedestal to Donald Trump, and I thank him every day for, speaking off the cup. I think this is a serious election. Now that Scalia's gone, you have 9 out of 13 appellate courts are run by overwhelming progressive majorities. The only stopgap to that legislating from the bench was a sometime 5-4 majority led by Scalia. There are very, very important issues, serious issues that need to be entertained. Now, I understand everybody's frustration. I'm frustrated too. It's part of the process. Look, the Senate was supposed to be a deliberative body, so we didn't emotionally react to things. And, if the Donald would do everything that he says when he says the right things, I would support him. But to me, you can often learn about a person's character by examining their history and seeing what they truly represent as foretelling what they're going to represent in the future. And Barack Obama, if you had listened to what he said when he was on the campaign trail, if you had read what he had written, if you look at his legislative history prior to becoming president, you knew exactly what kind of president he was going to be. My caution to you is this is a serious election. You should take it seriously. It saddens me about the whole Kardashian thing because I don't understand that phenomenon. I was in Italy. I took my mom there for her birthday. We ended up in Florence in Fashion Week, which was a disaster. It was just full of people. As we were sitting there, this crowd of paparazzi started wading through the crowd, and there was Snooki from Jersey Shore. And I said, I don't understand this concept. Why do people love this reality television show? And just as I was saying that, my sister-in-law was running down the street with a pen and a paper trying to get her autograph. So in conclusion, look, this is a very serious election with serious, serious consequences. It is going to change the fabric of who we are. When you look at these candidates, look at them very carefully. My job is to inspire you to be a catalyst of thought with my cartoons. So you need to be inspired by buying my book, because there's 270 cartoons in there. But think about these issues and the profound effect it's going to have. $19 trillion. $18 trillion, I think, was $55,000 worth of debt for every single one of you. And $19 trillion, we're probably going to be at $20 trillion by the time this president leaves. These things are going to have devastating consequences to who we are. So look at the cartoons, study what's going on. You guys have complete control. The beauty of America is its people, not the government. Regardless of what anybody tells you to try and say, well, I want to be president because I can solve all your problems. Government is not the solution. The individual is the solution. We are empowered. The individual is the one who produces things, makes innovation. Government just moves stuff around from one area to another. $1.2 trillion in regulations per year. Imagine what a devastating effect that has on our economy, especially when the federal outlay is like, I think the budget that Obama just submitted was $4 trillion. Thank you for coming out. Oh, and I'm supposed to mention my book signing is where? At the book signing place. At the book signing room, which is right next to the paying for the book signing room. Thanks, Kevin. Yeah, absolutely.